Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys about something that doesn't always get discussed enough that maybe should be here on YouTube, and that is people understanding the differences between trying to train and gain size drug-free versus guys who are doing it with chemical enhancement. And the biggest problem you see with that is that people oftentimes say, well, so-and-so is drug-free and they did it, and here's the reality. Just because someone says they're drug-free doesn't mean that they are. In fact, there are many, many cases to where the majority of people who use drugs are better off, and it's in their own personal, legal, and financial interest to lie about it and say they're on drugs. And particularly if they're making their living in any way giving you advice. So you're dealing in situations oftentimes where someone it is in their best interest to use drugs and in their best interest to lie to you about it and to assume by default that they are drug-free and to then say, well, this worked for them and they're drug-free, really makes you a little naive. And it's not the best way to go about things. It doesn't mean that they aren't. It just means that you're naive if you accept that they are. Understand the difference. Now, that being said, there's another point to consider that someone might have achieved really great results with 7 or 8 years of training using certain protocols while being drug-free if they have the genetics for that size, but who's to say that they wouldn't have gained it in 5 had they been a little smarter? And that's what we're trying to reach when we give advice on stuff like this, is not how to help you eventually reach your goals, but how to reach them with a decent amount of efficiency and to reach goals in 5 years if you're capable of reaching them in 5 years rather than taking 7 or 8 to get there. So, a few things that we need to look at balancing around that doesn't always get addressed when training drug-free. Number one, it's going to be frequency of training per body part or per exercise. Muscle protein synthesis returns to baseline in the contractile proteins of the muscle tissue within 28 to 48 hours after you train. So if you're only hitting a muscle once a week, you're only getting at most, even with high volume training, about 48 hours of growth time out of your 7 days per week. Now, it isn't necessary for you to keep that muscle protein synthesis elevated full time 7 days a week, but you're certainly going to do better if you can keep it elevated a minimum of 4 days out of the 7. You're going to do a lot better. You're probably going to make noticeably more gains. So what I would recommend is that generally you train every muscle group or critical lift in your routine 2 to 3 times a week. And if you're on a split routine, that's going to seem like a contradiction coming up later, but we're going to get to that. And if you're doing that 2 or 3 times a week, you're giving yourself a minimum of 4 days per week to where you're probably growing, at least in each muscle group or body part. Whereas you're not going to get that if you train in the method that was really kind of designed for people who are using hefty amounts of anabolics. So once you have that locked in, the next thing to consider is actual frequency of training and recovery. One of the biggest things that anabolic steroids and other performance-enhancing drugs do outside of prolonging muscle protein synthesis from training is they help you recover faster. So if you're in the gym training and lifting weights every day instead of doing maybe a different type of exercise that uses different energy systems, and you're only weightlifting and beating away with fairly intense weight training, you're not recovering enough, and it is going to beat your body up over time, and it may be actually slowing down recovery enough so that you're progressing less, which we're going to cover next progression. You're progressing less, and so even though your muscle protein synthesis is elevated, you're not recovering enough, and you're still stimulating less weekly and monthly growth as a result of it, and you're still going to grow slower even though you're technically training harder. So what I would say for most of you, you need 3 days off per week. So you can train 3 or 4 days a week if you're drug-free, with the exception of if you're modulating it with things like, I've discussed methods of how to deadlift every day or squat every day and make amazing progress on them, but the thing is, if you're coming in and you're doing high volumes of training with that, you're going to bury yourself trying to do something like that. Those are for people who are doing an approach who are trying to maximize efficiency, where you can come in and deadlift every day, but you're keeping your other overall training volume low and using something like the deadlift as an overall strength and mass builder for you. And it works fantastic when done in that way, exercises like that. But if you're trying to do a real high volume approach for the rest of your body, it's not going to work very well. So if unless you're doing some sort of protocol like that, you're actually training with a fairly high volume, enough to stimulate really good growth, you're going to need to recover from it 3 to 4 days a week. So that means if you're going to hit every body part 2 or 3 times a week and you're going to train 3 to 4 days a week, that really leaves you the only best options for a drug-free lifter trying to gain size. It's going to be a full body type program 3 days a week, or some sort of either upper lower or push-pull split 4 days a week. And the reason I say that instead of something like push-pull legs spaces you out too much, you're stuck training too often, and legs are push or pull. Deadlifts or Romanian deadlifts, stiff leg deadlifts, those are pull exercises for your hamstrings and glutes and things, and squats, leg presses, things like that are push exercises. You could just simply incorporate your lower body into a push-pull type method, and that is also a very viable way to do that. So 3 to 4 days a week. The next thing that you need to consider is your actual progression. If you're not on drugs, people need to throw away all this stuff about, oh, just trying to train to failure or beyond failure is their method to reach things, or just doing as much volume as they can, which they may not be able to recover from without drugs. And I'm not saying there are people who aren't. There are people who build work capacity amazingly well, people who are just genetically gifted at recovery who can get away with very high volume training without drugs. So don't think that I'm accusing everyone who uses ultra high volume and gets great success on it of being on drugs, because it's not true. There are genetic traits that will allow you to do that also. Just note that they are in the minority. So in order to focus on guaranteeing rather than taking a crapshoot or a gamble with your genetics or a gamble with what you're doing, you need to focus on progression. That means getting stronger. Stronger doesn't necessarily mean your 1 rep max. That could be power. It could be your 1 rep max. Strength means if you can lift 200 pounds for 8 reps, you need to focus on being able to lift 210 pounds for 8 reps. Or being able to take that 200 pounds and work towards doing 9 reps or 10 reps, or maybe get it to 12 reps one day. That's all gaining strength. If you can do more reps with the same weight, you got stronger. If you can add weight to the bar for the same reps, you got stronger. That's where you need to be focused upon, is going to be progression and progressive overload, and being able to subject yourself to higher amounts of workload consistently over time. And if you combine all those elements together and you're getting sufficient nutrition, enough sleep, no nutritional deficiencies, getting enough protein, everything in there, then you're going to be fine. You're going to gain probably nearly the maximum amount of muscle mass that you're going to be able to gain per year as a drug-free lifter. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.